Hi everyone, welcome back to our business ethics class. So today we'll talk about ethical decision making in corporate governance, accounting, and finance. So the first concept I want to talk about is this notion of gatekeepers. So, um, gatekeepers are like accountants, auditors, and financial analysts. They ensure that markets operate fairly by verifying financial statements, providing unbiased analysis for informed decision making, and ensuring compliance with laws and regulations. So, those people who or those roles that belong to this category of gatekeepers, they also serve an ethical role. So today we'll talk about those ethical roles they play and the kind of ethical nature of their job. I actually want you to think about the ethical roles of these gatekeepers using the models and the ethical frameworks that we've already talked about. So this is something you can talk about in your writing response. So to see the role and the importance, and especially the ethical importance and significance of those gatekeepers. So one of the kind of acts that can demonstrate the significance would be the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. So this act was passed in 2022 after some major corporate scandals. It aims to improve corporate governance through four aspects. As you can see, there is a large emphasis put on the idea of auditor or boards or this process of mandate reports and stuff like that. So ISO Act proposes that we have to improve corporate governance through auditor independence, board accountability, internal controls, and executive certification, which definitely made this role of gatekeeper in corporate governance much more important. And because this act chose to improve corporate governance through improving the kind of weight we put on those gatekeepers. So maybe that in a way also tells us that gatekeepers do actually pretty effectively and significantly contribute to better corporate governance. So what do those kind of gatekeepers or committees do? So we talk about internal control in the last in the SOX Act, and internal control was talked about in there, right? So how do we do those? So what are the things that we have to censor and to evaluate? What are the things that we have to gatekeep? So that really requires us to have certain theoretical frameworks, right? So the COSO framework, so the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations framework, was one framework that kind of guide us, and topics were questions like this. So it emphasizes control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and also monitoring. So this is a framework kind of grounded in which certain gatekeeping or censoring or evaluation could take place. So we've just talked about this notion of gatekeeping and how it's like, or how it kind of gets grounded, and how it can be actually practiced through certain frameworks. So now I do want to talk about, so when we do gatekeeping, we will encounter a lot of problems, right? And when we are in corporate governance, a lot of things do go wrong, right? So I want to start actually talking about some of the problems that are pretty classic or typical. So we have a more of a kind of sense of what are we talking about when we are talking about corporate governance, or what are we talking about when we are talking about like doing gatekeeping for improving corporate governance, right? So the agency problem would be a very good example of this. So what is the agency problem? So basically it just talks about when individuals act as agents and they prioritize their personal gain over their duty to, let's say, shareholders. So they just only care about their own benefits. So this would be something like different like evaluations or frameworks or different like roles of gatekeepers will be able to diagnose. And we will also have solutions to this or strategies to tackle this, so such as incentive alignment, so linking compensation to long-term performance, regulation, enforcing laws to deter unethical behavior, and also maybe like fostering virtue ethics, cultivating a culture of trust, loyalty, and ethical responsibility. So we've just talked about the agency problem, which kind of serves as an example for kind of showing you what are we gatekeeping like for, what are the problems that we try to diagnose and resolve as gatekeepers. So if you are a gatekeeper, and as you can see probably at this point, that gatekeepers do have a very important ethical role in business, and they play a very important role in ethical decision making, right? So we know that they ensure ethical decision making, but what are the principles for their ethical decision making? So here the textbook talk about transparency, accountability, and equity. So transparency, accountability, equity are the things that we are trying to foster. And I also especially for maintaining trust in financial systems. So we've just talked about regulatory frameworks like the SOX, and also internal mechanisms like COSO. They give us the foundational tools for ensuring ethical governance. And of course, we will have different frameworks for including auditors and gatekeepers in our systems and institutions. So that's also a very important part. At the same time, a culture of integrity and ethical decision making is also paramount. So some important aspects of ethical governance, corporate. We've talked about gatekeepers. So there is a special type of gatekeeper. So that would be ethical boards or ethical board members. So in a lot of different institutions, frequently there are ethical boards which would work on certain ethical controversies or ethical related issues or procedures. So there are legal duties for those ethical board members. So they have 3 core legal obligations. So the first is duty of care. So they have to exercise reasonable care to ensure that management fulfills its responsibilities. They also have to rely on reliable information and exercise good judgment. The second is duty of good faith. So they have to stay true to the organization's mission and objectives. They have to ensure that their decisions align with the firm's long-term goals. And the third type of legal obligation would be to resolve conflicts of interest in favor of the corporation, and they also have to act with undivided allegiance to the firm's best interests. That was the legal obligations we just talked about. So there are also different principles that an ethical board member has to follow. So those are some examples of principles for ethical governance for ethical boards. So I didn't put the ethical boards there, so I forgot to put it there. I'll make sure to add that. So those are some examples of those principles. Like they have to publish principles of governance, they have to ensure board independence, they have to select board members based on values, not just experience, so on and so forth. So I'll not read through them. So those are the principles they have to follow. Or so this was proposed by some person, so a scholar, and so there might be different sets of principles, but and some like institutions or some scholars might disagree with this set of principles, but the idea is ethical board members have to follow principles of some sort. It will look similar to this. It might differ with content or it might disagree with this, but it has this kind of format. I also want to very briefly touch upon the role of the Federal Sentencing Guidelines, FSG, which also provides a very important framework to encourage ethical corporate governance. So I'll not go into the details of it. If you want to dive into it deeper, you can check out the textbook reading I posted. We talk about agency problem as a sort of example for what might go wrong when with corporate governance. So insider trading is another thing that might go wrong with corporate governance. So this would also be something that those gatekeepers and ethical board members and auditors try to diagnose and prevent. And it is indeed unethical, a lot of people say, because it leads to a lot of unfair advantage, erosion of trust, violation of duty, and market inefficiency. If you observe those 4 reasons, you will see that they do conflict a lot with some of the principles we've talked about and covered so far in this lecture. And note that I think so the kind of unethical we're talking about here kind of is slightly different from the kind of unethical we talk about in the first 3 units when we talk about more like the moral philosophers and the kind of like ethical philosophical frameworks. So especially number 4. So the kind of ethical, the term unethical used here for number 4 seems to distort from the kind of unethical we talk about like before. So it's more kind of talking about like the business and the well-being of the business and things like that. So it has like a slightly different shift with how we are using ethical here and what we think is unethical here, and the sense and the kind of senses or ideas we associate with the idea of unethical. So I think like here we also try to consider like the well-being of the institution, the kind of efficiency of the business, or like the health of the business. So we think about like a lot of these like more business related things. And of course, a lot of people disagree with what we said just now, so they try to pose counterexamples to the argument just now. So 2 counterexamples they've posted would be merit-based access. So some argue that access to insider information is a natural result of hard work and achievement, and individuals should be allowed to benefit from the information they acquire through their roles. And also another kind of example they pose would be market correction. So they so the proponents of so the opponents of the argument in the last page claim that insider trading has limited long-term impact because markets will eventually correct themselves when the information becomes public. So while it's true that markets self-correct over time, the harm to individual investors who traded in ignorance the erosion of trust in market fairness cannot be justified. So additionally, the notion of earning access ignores the ethical and legal responsibility that come with insider positions. So the paragraph I read just now would be a way to kind of critique the two counterexamples I talked about just now. So as you can see, like we are going back and forth about whether insider trading is actually ethical or not. So the rough structure of what we've talked about so far would be this. So basically we've talked about gatekeeping, we've talked about different frameworks and kind of legal frameworks, we've talked about specific examples of it, and as you do government, as you try to like ensure ethical corporate governance, frequently it's not just something. So it's more like you diagnose different problems like insider trading and agency problems. And as you can see, for a lot of problems or diagnosis, sometimes they are also not that ethically straightforward as well. So frequently we run into this kind of ethical analysis of a certain diagnosis or problem or phenomenon related to corporate governance. So we do a lot of analysis, we try to make a lot of different arguments, we try to offer our own reasoning on this. So frequently this is also what ethical members of ethical boards do as well. So by talking about like this ethical analysis of insider trading just now, I was trying to demonstrate to you how we can dive deeper into this idea of ethical corporate governance and how we might run into tensions, questions, and problems, but also like opportunities to do more research. So if you are interested in this, you can also write a paper on ethical corporate governance and also try to pick certain phenomenon that's related to ethical or unethical corporate governance, and you can delve deeper into that issue or a phenomenon and try to go back and forth and argue and analyze whether why that issue is ethical or not ethical. So frequently you can go like deeper. So what we've seen just now, it's done some analysis, but you can cut much deeper, and you can basically keep going back and forth and generate a lot of very in-depth, very exciting and kind of solid analysis of these. And those works, those discussions and analysis would be kind of like basis or fundamentals or content or materials that the gatekeepers could work with.